When you look at somebody who knows how to wear a smile, you would think that smile is the whole story. You see the pictures, you hear the laugh, you watch them light up a room, and you assume that glow must follow them home. But what if I told you that some of the brightest smiles are nothing more than armor, a mask that's been practiced in the mirror, a performance rehearsed so well that even they start to believe it when the crowd is watching? What if I told you that when the lights dim, when the doors close, when the world stops looking, that same smile doesn't even show up at the dinner table? There is a difference between the face you show and the fight you carry. Some people know how to cover their silence with a joke, their sadness with a compliment, their insecurity with a story. They can be magnetic on the outside, but crumbling on the inside. And the truth is, that kind of living is exhausting. To keep showing up with laughter in public, but drowning in quiet at home will wear down even the strongest. But they won't tell you that. They'll walk in the room acting like the world is theirs to conquer, while at home the only thing they're conquering is their own loneliness. It's not easy to admit that the smile doesn't match the silence, because silence tells the truth. Silence has no makeup, no filter, no applause to hide behind. Silence will remind you of what you don't want to feel and what you don't want to face. And that's why they cover it up so quickly. Because if you sat in it too long, you would know the applause doesn't heal the ache. The smile doesn't cure the sorrow. The laughter doesn't erase the loneliness. So, what do? They perfect the art of performance. They learn how to give compliments, how to draw attention, how to make people admire them. Because admiration is easier to manage than intimacy. Admiration doesn't ask hard questions. Admiration doesn't notice when the tears hit the pillow. Admiration doesn't come knocking on your door to say, I see you breaking. But intimacy does. Love does. Home does. And that's the very place where the mask slips. See, some people are terrified of being known because being known means being seen. And being seen means someone might notice the cracks. So they protect themselves by keeping the show alive for the world, but refusing to be vulnerable where it matters most. And yet, here's the secret. No amount of smiling in public will fix the silence in private. Because the silence has a way of echoing, of stretching into the corners of the night, of reminding them that even if the world claps, it doesn't mean they feel whole. Some of you know what that's like, to live with someone who wears the smile so loud outside, but carries a quiet so heavy at home. You've watched them turn it on like a switch when the phone rings or company comes over. You've seen them pour charm into strangers while keeping distance with the ones closest to them. And you've asked yourself, why does the world get the joy, but we get the shadows? Why do they laugh for everyone else but whisper around us? That's because the smile is safe, but the silence is sacred. The silence holds the truth they can't afford to release. But here's the part they'll never tell you. They are scared of being found out. Scared that if the world knew what really lived in their silence, the applause would stop. Scared that if someone pressed too deeply, they'd find that the confidence was only a costume. So they guard it fiercely, desperately, with everything in them. And while they're protecting themselves from being exposed, they're also building walls that keep love out. Because love doesn't live in the performance. Love lives in the pause. Love doesn't show up for the show. Love shows up for the silence. And until they understand that, they'll keep hiding behind the smile, hoping it's enough to distract from the truth their silence is screaming. The smile that doesn't match the silence isn't strength, it's survival. But survival was never meant to be the final destination. Control is a tricky thing, isn't it? On the outside, it can look like organization, like order, like discipline. It can look like someone who always has the plan, always knows the way, always keeps everything running smoothly. But behind closed doors, control takes on another face. It becomes the grip that squeezes too tight, the pressure that demands perfection, the invisible chain that keeps everyone in the house walking on eggshells. See, it's one thing to guide, But it's another thing entirely to demand that everything bend to your will. There are people who make home less of a refuge and more of a stage. Every conversation, every reaction, every move has to follow their script. If you laugh too loud, they'll quiet you. If you disagree, they'll silence you. If you shine too bright, they'll dim you. Because the moment anything feels out of their control, it threatens the world they've built. They thrive on the illusion that if they can control the environment, they can control the outcome. But the truth is, no matter how hard you try, you can't control love, you can't control truth, and you can't control the human heart. What they don't want you to see is how fragile that control really is. It's like holding water in your hands. The tighter you squeeze, the more it slips away. They demand order because inside they feel chaos. They choreograph every step because inside they feel like they're stumbling. They bark commands because deep down they're terrified someone will see the cracks in their authority. And yet, the more they try to control, the more they reveal just how out of control they really are. The house becomes a reflection of their need to dominate. The smallest things turn into battles. A dish left in the sink, a tone of voice they didn't like, a door that wasn't shut the way they wanted. It all becomes ammunition. And those living under that roof learn to adapt, not out of peace, but out of survival. They learn what not to say, how not to look, how to keep the air as still as possible. Because the moment things feel off script, the storm begins. That's not order. That's fear wearing a mask. But here's the irony. They convince themselves that control keeps them safe. They believe that if everything is predictable, if everyone bows to their rules, then nothing can surprise them, nothing can hurt them. But control doesn't heal wounds, it only hides them. Control doesn't bring safety, it creates distance. Because people don't feel loved when they're controlled. They feel managed. They don't feel cared for. They feel caged. And cages, no matter how polished, are still prisons. Sometimes they don't even realize how much damage it causes. To them, it's just keeping order. But to those around them, it's suffocating. The laughter gets quieter. The conversations get shorter. The joy gets dimmer. Until the house feels less like a home and more like a performance hall where everyone is forced to play their part. That's not what family was meant to be. Family isn't about control. It's about connection. But control chokes connection until it can't breathe anymore. And still they hide this secret so well. To outsiders, they look like the one who has it all together. They can smile in public, shake hands, serve charm, and make it seem like home must be perfect because they're in charge. But the ones who live with them know the truth that order is fragile, that control is brittle, and that behind the appearance of strength lies an insecurity too deep to admit. But here's what they don't want anyone to know. The control isn't about power. It's about fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being vulnerable, fear of being loved without conditions. Because love requires release. Love requires trust. Love requires letting go. And for someone who's built their safety on control, letting go feels like death. But until they learn to release that grip, they'll never experience what love was meant to be. The need to control what looks out of control is the loudest confession of an inner storm they'll never say out loud. Confidence can look so convincing, can it? The voice that speaks loud enough to silence a room. The walk that carries like every step is a declaration. The presence that demands attention without even asking. To everyone watching, it looks unshakable. But if you've ever lived close enough, if you've ever seen behind the curtain, you know that sometimes the confidence you see in the light is trembling in the shadows. The cracks don't show up in the speech or the smile. They show up in the quiet moments when nobody's watching, when the applause has faded and the mirror is the only audience left. There's a weight that comes with pretending you're as strong as people believe you to be. It feels good at first when people look at you as if you have it all together, as if you've mastered every part of your life. But what they don't know is that image comes at a cost, because the moment you start living up to the version people think you are, you start hiding the version of you that's still unsure, still fragile, still fighting not to fall apart. That's where the cracks begin. In private, the confidence feels less like truth and more like a performance. They'll stare in the mirror longer than you'd think, not to admire themselves, but to rehearse the role. They'll question if the voice was strong enough, if the words landed hard enough, if the presence looked powerful enough. And when doubt creeps in, it whispers the very thing they don't want to admit. What if you're not as strong as they think you are? That whisper becomes their shadow, following them through every room in the house. So they fight it with more performance. They speak louder. They dress sharper. They double down on their image because they think if they keep feeding confidence to the world, maybe eventually it will feed them back. But it rarely does, because admiration can clap for you, but it cannot carry you. Praise can lift you up, but it cannot fill the emptiness you keep hidden. And when the cracks in the confidence widen, that emptiness only echoes louder. If you've ever watched closely, you've seen it. The way the smile fades when the cameras go off. The way the laughter dies the moment the door shuts. The way the energy drains when there's no one left to impress. Those are the moments that reveal the truth, that the confidence was never as solid as it seemed. It was patched together with approval, glued by performance, and painted with charm. But paint doesn't fix broken walls. It just hides them. And here's the thing, they are terrified of being found out, terrified that someone will see past the cracks, terrified that the mask might slip just enough for someone to notice the doubt. Because in their mind, being admired is safer than being vulnerable. Vulnerability feels like weakness, and weakness is the one thing they can't afford to show. So they keep patching, keep covering, keep pretending, but the cracks keep spreading. Those cracks show up in the way they snap over little things at home. They show up in the defensiveness, in the sharp tone, in the short temper, because nothing threatens a fragile confidence more than the possibility of exposure. And the people closest to them often carry the weight of that. They're the ones who see the gap between the public image and the private reality. They're the ones who feel the tension of living in a house built on appearance instead of authenticity. But here's what they'll never say out loud. The cracks aren't just flaws, they're cries for help. They don't want to admit it, but part of them longs for someone to look past the performance and say, you don't have to be perfect to be loved. Part of them aches for the kind of acceptance that doesn't require applause or admiration, but that kind of acceptance can't live where masks are more important than truth. And so they hide, even from the ones who would love them anyway. The cracks in the confidence don't mean there's no strength. They just mean the strength has been misplaced. Because true strength isn't in how loud you speak or how flawless you look. It's in the courage to be real, to let someone see the cracks and trust that love won't run away. But until they face that truth, they'll keep patching walls that are destined to fall. The cracks in the confidence are the proof that even the strongest looking voices can tremble when the mirror gets too honest. Love me, but don't outshine me. That's the unspoken rule that hangs in the air like smoke you can't quite see, but you can always smell. On the surface, it sounds like affection. It looks like care. It even feels like approval when it's convenient. But underneath, there's a condition, an invisible boundary line that says, you can rise, but not higher than me. You can glow, but not brighter than me. You can succeed, but only if your success still leaves me in control of the spotlight. It's a strange kind of love because it wears the costume of support, but carries the weight of competition. One moment they clap for you, the next they're tightening their jaw when the applause lingers too long in your direction. They'll tell you how proud they are, but if your shine draws more eyes than theirs, suddenly the atmosphere shifts. You feel it in the tone of their words, in the coolness of their silence, in the way they minimize what you've achieved so they can restore the balance of power. At home, this plays out in subtle ways. Maybe you share an idea and it gets dismissed until they repeat it later and take credit. Maybe you're celebrated by someone else and instead of joining in the celebration, they change the subject back to themselves. Maybe you step into a season where you're thriving and rather than being your loudest cheerleader, they quietly start competing with you. It's not that they don't want you to do well. It's that they want you to do well only if it doesn't eclipse their image. The secret they're hiding is that their affection has strings attached. Strings that say, I'll love you as long as your growth doesn't threaten my place. I'll support you as long as your light doesn't expose my shadows. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know how confusing it feels. Because love isn't supposed to shrink you. Real love doesn't get smaller when you get bigger. Real love doesn't dim when you shine. It glows brighter because of you. But for them, love feels like a competition they can't afford to lose. And so they try to regulate it. They try to manage your brightness so it doesn't make them feel smaller. They'll disguise it as advice, as concern, as correction. But really, it's just fear dressed up in authority. Fear that if you rise too high, people will notice the cracks in their foundation. Fear that your strength will highlight their weakness. Fear that your freedom will reveal the cage they built for themselves. What they don't realize is that this conditional kind of love not only damages you, it drains them too. Because living in constant comparison is exhausting. Measuring every relationship by who's shining more, who's being noticed more, who's being celebrated more, it creates an environment where nobody can truly rest. And home should be the place where you can rest. Home should be where you lay down the armor, not where you have to polish it sharper. When they say, love me, but don't outshine me, what they really mean is, I can only love you as much as I feel secure in myself. But here's the truth. Love built on insecurity will always come with conditions, and conditions are just another form of control. You can't grow freely under those terms. You can't expand fully when someone else is trying to manage the size of your wings. And yet, they'll never admit that's what they're doing. They'll frame it as care, but deep down it's fear. If you've ever had to shrink yourself so someone else could feel bigger, you know the weight of this. You know what it's like to silence your joy so you don't trigger their jealousy. You know what it's like to celebrate quietly because you're afraid your blessing will make them bitter. And you know how heavy it feels to carry the guilt of shining too brightly in a house that only allows dim light. But love was never meant to work that way. Love doesn't just tolerate your growth. It waters it. Love doesn't just allow your shine. It reflects it. Love doesn't just survive your success. It thrives in it. And the moment you're forced to choose between being loved and being whole, you're no longer being loved at all. You're being managed. The secret they hide is simple. They don't want you to outshine them because deep down, they're terrified you already do. Loneliness is one of those things that doesn't always look like loneliness to the world. It can look like confidence, like charm, like charisma. It can look like someone who's always surrounded by people, always entertaining, always in the middle of the spotlight. But when the lights go out and the crowd goes home, that same person can be left in a silence so deep it almost swallows them whole. They'll never admit it, but the truth is they're aching from an emptiness that applause can't fill and company can't cure. It's a different kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from being unseen. They can be in a room full of people and still feel invisible. They can be in a house full of family and still feel disconnected. Because it's not about who's around them. It's about who actually knows them. And when you've built a life on performance, on image, on control, being truly known feels dangerous. So they keep the mask on, and the mask keeps the loneliness alive. They'll hide it with business. They'll stack their schedules so high that they never have to sit with themselves too long. They'll drown out the silence with noise, music, TV, Conversations that never go deep, anything to avoid hearing the ache echo in their own chest. And yet the quiet moments always come. The phone stops buzzing. The house goes still. The distractions fade. And there they are, face to face with the one thing they can't control, that emptiness. Sometimes it shows up in the way they cling to attention. They need the room to see them, need the compliments to keep flowing, need the validation to keep pouring in. But attention isn't intimacy. You can have 1,000 people clap for you and still feel like no one truly sees you. You can gather admiration by the handful and still starve for love. That's the secret they won't say out loud. Deep down, they know the difference. They know that after the compliments fade, after the admirers go home, they're left with a loneliness that no spotlight can cure. And you can feel it in the atmosphere at home. The conversations don't go beneath the surface. The affection feels conditional. The connection feels brittle. Because when you're afraid of being exposed, you never let people get close enough to see the real you. And the irony is, the very thing they fear, being truly known, is the only thing that could break the loneliness they carry. But instead, they build walls. And those walls don't just keep the world out, they keep love out too. If you've ever been close to someone like this, you know how heavy it is. You can be right there, offering love, offering connection, offering presence, and still feel like they're miles away. You can sit at the same table, share the same space, live in the same house, and still feel the distance. Because loneliness isn't about proximity, it's about access. And when someone won't give you access to their heart, you can never close the gap. But here's the truth. They don't actually want to be alone. They want love. They want connection. They want intimacy just like anybody else. They just don't know how to receive it without the fear of losing control. So they settle for admiration instead. They settle for surface level attention instead of risking real love. And in doing so, they keep feeding the loneliness they hate, but can't let go of. The saddest part is that they've convinced themselves this is safer, that keeping people at a distance protects them, that never letting anyone too close means they can't get hurt. But in trying to avoid the pain of rejection, they've created the pain of isolation. In trying to shield themselves from being seen, they've guaranteed they'll never be fully known. And that kind of loneliness runs deeper than silence. It becomes a lifestyle. They'll never admit it. But their greatest fear isn't being alone. It's being alone even while surrounded. Because when the lights fade and the noise dies down, that's when the truth whispers back, you are not known here. The loneliness they can't admit is the prison they've built with their own hands. Exposure is the one thing they fear the most. They can manage control. They can cover cracks. They can juggle attention. They can even hide loneliness. But the idea of being fully seen, of someone piecing together the truth behind the mask, that shakes them to their core. Because if the curtain ever falls, if the world ever glimpses what they've worked so hard to hide, everything they've built starts to feel fragile. They live with this constant tension, this quiet paranoia that someone will catch them off guard. That one slip of the tongue, one moment of weakness, one crack in the performance will reveal the truth they've spent years burying. So they overcompensate. They sharpen their image, polish their words, control their surroundings. All in the name of staying one step ahead of exposure. And to everyone else, it looks like confidence. But in reality, it's fear disguised as perfection. You can almost feel it in the way they move through life. The way they correct a story before it's even finished. The way they shift conversations away from their flaws. The way they light up when people praise them, but shut down if anyone gets too close to the truth. It's as if their entire existence is built on this unspoken rule. Don't let anyone see too much. Don't let them see the cracks. Don't let them see the questions. Don't let them see the mess. Keep it polished. Keep it flawless. Keep it safe. At home, this fear shows up in subtle but heavy ways. Maybe it's the defensiveness when you ask an innocent question. Maybe it's the anger when you point out something small. Maybe it's the walls that go up every time you try to get closer. Because the closer you get, the more they feel the risk of being exposed. And when someone lives in constant fear of exposure, love starts to feel like a threat instead of a gift. Vulnerability feels like danger instead of intimacy. That's why their walls are so high. They're not just keeping you out. They're trying to keep the truth in. But here's the hard reality. Fear of exposure doesn't stop the truth from existing. You can bury it. You can cover it. You can dress it up in charm. But truth has a way of pressing against the surface. It leaks through in the short temper, in the fragile confidence, in the need for control, in the loneliness that won't let go. No matter how tightly it's managed, the truth always leaves fingerprints. And they know it. That's why they fight so hard to guard it. They fear exposure because exposure would dismantle the illusion. The illusion that they're unshakable. The illusion that they're always in control. The illusion that the image they've built is the reality they live. If anyone ever saw past that, they worry the admiration would stop, the applause would fade, the power would shrink. And so the fear grows. It grows until it dictates how they love, how they speak, how they act, how they protect themselves. But here's the thing. Living in fear of exposure is a prison. You spend your life guarding doors, locking windows, patching cracks, hoping nobody ever notices the truth you've hidden away. And while it might keep you from being found out, it also keeps you from being free. Because freedom requires honesty. Freedom requires letting someone see you, flaws and all, and still choosing to love and be loved. Without that, all you have is performance. And performance may keep the image alive, but it slowly kills the soul. If you've ever been close to someone who lives this way, you know how heavy it feels to walk on that edge with them. You know what it's like to never feel like you've reached their real heart, to always sense that there's something you're not allowed to touch. And the truth is, you're right. There is something hidden. There is something they're terrified you'll uncover. And that's why the relationship feels like glass, beautiful but fragile. You know one wrong move might shatter it. But exposure isn't the enemy they think it is. Exposure is the path to healing. Exposure is what breaks chains, what dismantles masks, what rebuilds real love. They don't see it yet. But the very thing they fear most is the very thing that could set them free. The fear of exposure is the cage they lock from the inside.